Welcome, my lords, to the Well-Earned Comforts podcast. I'm Sam.
And I'm Seth.
Thanks for joining us on the Walls of Isengard as we explore the many works of Tolkien and, of course, discuss life. We're glad to have you as part of the fellowship, as there's no telling where we'll be swept off to. And this time we are sweeping ourselves away to a different corner of Middle-earth and a different age of Middle-earth entirely, as we've spent a lot of time focusing on Children of Húrin. That was a lot of fun, but Seth and I decided let's get the creative juices flowing again and maybe tackle something that we haven't really looked a whole lot into. And so today I'm really excited for our discussion on Gimli and Legolas and their relationship and how unorthodox it is and how different it is. And I'm really excited for the dialogue that we get into. But of course, before that, we can't start a Well-Earned Comforts podcast without some babbling like Butterbur. So I'm going to check in with Seth, my brother over in Michigan. How's it hanging? Left, right, middle? Just kidding. That was bad.
No comment.
I don't know why I said that.
Yeah.
Edit.
Yeah. You're editing the audio. I'm editing the video, so I'm leaving that in. Well done. I hope your students watch that. Yeah. It's going well. It's been busy, as you obviously know. Everybody was out here in Michigan, up about an hour and 15 minutes north of Amanda and I's place, and we got a nice big house with the whole family, and it was an absolute blast. We had just a heck of a time. It was so fun spending time on the lake, and being from Colorado, we never really went to lakes much. Like, it's just not something we did. And so just the ability to go out on the kayaks and the paddle boards and even that janky old rowboat was just an absolute blast.
Yeah.
So I don't know, ever since getting back from that, it's just been busy, right back into the flow of work. And I'm about to work another 4/12s in a row, and then Amanda's folks are coming out the next day. So
Oh, really?
It just keeps going.
It just keeps going, man. That is a lot. Yeah.
How about for you guys?
Who do you think had real quick, who do you think had the best backflip off of the rowboat?
Probably David.
Yeah. There's just so much less of him to rotate. You know what I'm saying? Like, I got all 6'1" of me trying to flip over.
Yeah. Nice flex there. 6'1". No big deal.
Well, I mean, that's something you will just never understand what it's like.
I will not.
The weather's different here, Seth.
Yeah.
It's a whole new world.
That 5'11" to 6 foot range really makes a difference, doesn't it?
More than you'd think.
How's Ariel doing? She was very pregnant, but I'm glad she didn't pop while we were all out there.
Me too, man. I thought about it. I was like, should we have brought the car seat and our go bag and all that kind of stuff? But I was like, well, Seth can deliver you. I'm sure he's got some kind of she's like, nope, I'm not. Nope. I was like, okay. Yeah,
nope. That would not have happened.
Yeah, she was like, no, that's not going to happen. No, but she's doing really, really well. We had a lot of fun too. She loved the kayaking. It was fun seeing her out there with her big old belly, like kayaking. We did like morning kayaks too. And yeah, you're right. Just being on a lake was so much different, especially in just where we are in Colorado. Even in Kentucky, we have some lakes close by, but we haven't done a whole lot of water living, and just having the freedom to just hang out there and soak in the sun, be stupid, and try to play king of the paddle boat.
Oh yeah, that was a blast.
Yeah, just having the brothers back together and hanging out with dad, talking to him and seeing the kids. It was a wonderful time. But yeah, we're 37 weeks today officially, or rather Ariel is, which is technically full term. So Now the baby is fully developed in the sense that he can come out whenever he wants, and barring any issues, he wouldn't have to go to the NICU, he wouldn't be preemie, anything like that. So of course Ariel's like, I'm ready whenever.
Right.
But the due date is September 1st, so that's, again, like I said, 3 weeks from now, but it could be whenever. We went to the doctor on Wednesday, and she said she's about 1 inch dilated, so really not that far along. So it probably will still be a couple weeks, but she's taken like some raspberry tea. She's bouncing on her exercise ball. She's going on walks. She's like, whatever I can do to get this thing out of me, pretty much. And so anything like, healthy or natural, of course.
Sure.
Yeah, so we're just excited and anticipating that. I mean, work is it's kicking up for us. We have our fall kickoff this Wednesday for students, where we start back up every single week. And so I've told my coworker John, I'm like, I'll teach this one, but I don't think I can really plan for anything for a couple of weeks. And thankfully he's been like, I'll take it, I'll figure it out. So, and all the leaders have been super like understanding and stuff too. So we'll have plenty of coverage from work and stuff.
It's
So
almost like people have
yeah,
kids from time to time.
yeah, people understand a little bit of what it's like. So even though we don't have mom and dad around and all the siblings and stuff for that family support, we do have a lot of people. We did one of my volunteer leaders. They threw us a little diaper shower, so we just got a bunch of diapers and
Nice.
um, yeah, just super sweet stuff like that. And they've already got a meal train planned for us for when it happens, and so we feel very loved and blessed to be in part of this community.
That's
For sure.
awesome. I will add, it
Yeah.
was, I don't know, you just saying that not having family, it made my heart so full to see everybody interact with Evelyn and to watch, Ember,
Yeah.
little Ember, and even Killian interact with her. And she was just like mind blown that
Yeah.
there's these other kids that are, her age, and just the sweetness of those kids interacting with Evelyn. And then obviously you and Ariel spending time with her and everybody. It's just, oh man, it really made my heart full. So it's sad that you won't have that, but I am glad that you have a good support system down there.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be different, obviously. Nobody's really like your immediate family,
Yeah.
but there's been a lot of wonderful people that have filled in that gap pretty well. But I'm excited that we're planning to do these little family reunions every year now, is hopefully is the case. And I think we've staked out somewhere near us this next year, maybe Tennessee. There's some really beautiful places, lake houses, or even just places out in the mountains. I'm using air quotes of the Smokies. They're mountains. They just
Sure.
there's nothing above tree line. But it's a different kind of beauty.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
well, let's jump into one of my favorite segments, our Riddles in the Dark. Again, for those of you who may be new, this is a part of the podcast/YouTube video. Thank you to Seth to start that up, where Seth and I use our combined same Lord of the Rings trilogy books here, where we decide if we can stump the other person on finding some dialogue from anywhere of the three books, and see if we can figure out who's talking, where they are in the book and the story and all that kind of stuff. So Seth, why don't you go first? Why don't you find something for me? And just historically, Seth has
Ooh.
been better at this than I have. So
Yeah, if you've listened
we'll
at
see
all,
how this
you
one goes.
definitely know who's got this on lock most of the time.
Yeah. There's
All
that.
right,
Seth, you done? You figured it out yet?
I got a couple people here. Couple people talking.
Okay. I'm drowning here.
The hobbits, cried Blank. Where are they then? Where is Frodo? I do not know. Before he died, Blank told me that the orcs had bound them.
Before he died. I feel like that's Merry and Pippin. I mean, maybe Aragorn talking to Boromir. I don't know, before he died, though. That sounds weird.
All right. The hobbits, cried Blank. Where are they then? Where is Frodo? I do not know, answered Blank. Before he died, Boromir told me the orcs had bound them. You should at least get the context on this one.
Yeah. Before Boromir died, right?
That's, yeah.
Okay, so then, well, I'm trying to decide if this isn't like the beginning of, or like the very end of the Return of the King, wow, this isn't the very end of the Fellowship of the Ring, where like the breaking of the Fellowship, where Aragorn like talks to Boromir because Boromir's already dead, and so I'm gonna guess maybe this is maybe with Gandalf as they're in Fangorn when no, it's not that. Okay,
Bro,
when he's regaling.
This is like the easiest one I've given you in a hot minute.
I know. I feel like it is, but is Aragorn talking? No, because Gimli and Legolas were there too. Is Aragorn talking to Gimli and Legolas?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
This is right
so
after
it's Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah.
Right after Boromir dies. Like
correct.
Right after.
Correct.
Okay. I forget that they had like the intimate, just one-on-one time before Legolas and Gimli found them. So
yeah.
Because in the movie, and that's where I get mixed up. I just need to read them again. I'm just going to read them again.
I think that might be a good choice.
In the movie, they're all together. Fair enough.
Well,
all
no,
right.
he comes a little, like, even in the movie, he says like, I'd follow you, my captain, or my brother, my captain, my king, or something like that. And then Legolas gives his like his very Legolas look, where it's just like,
he's like, oh.
Anyways.
True. All right. Well, let me find a spot.
You mean you weren't looking while I was looking?
I was not. I probably should have. Okay. That was one I opened up to one we've actually done before,
That's
which is
wild.
weird.
That is weird.
That is wild. Yeah, it's faithless is he who says farewell when the road darkens.
Yeah.
Gimli.
That wasn't even that long
So
ago.
a different one. No. Mm-mm.
Man, we both.
Ooh, I like this.
All right, let's hear it.
Okay. Much I wonder what counsels they are taking in the tents there below. For my part, like Mary, I wish that our victory, the war was now over. Yet whatever is still to do, I hope to have a part in it for the honor of the folk of the Lonely Mountain. It's easy, like,
Yeah,
hint at who's talking.
it's Gimli talking, which is wild that Gimli doesn't have a ton of dialogue throughout the series, and we both find something with Gimli in it. It's got to be at the end of the Battle of the Pelennor when they're deciding what to do next, and Gandalf and Aragorn are like, well, let's go on the suicide mission to try to distract Sauron.
You are correct, as always. This comes in the Return of the King after the Siege of Gondor, Battle of Pelennor Fields, all that.
Yep.
And then Legolas responds with, "And I for the folk of the Great Wood, and for the love of the Lord of the White Tree."
Yeah, I love
Which
how
something
he
that I
says
did.
that.
Yeah. Something when I was like going through some of my like hunting for dialogue between Legolas and Gimli, I found that a lot of what they talk about is just their love for Aragorn and their shock and awe for who he is. And Legolas even has a whole spiel on how he's like carrying on the valor of Beren. And it's he's like, even though there's been a gap between when we've seen something like that, he reminds me of what I've heard of Beren and stuff like that. So
yeah,
very cool how much they revere Aragorn there. But
yeah, they definitely.
Any idea what chapter?
I don't know the chapter names. We know this.
Last debate.
The last debate. It makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was a chapter, but we'll go with it.
It's a short one.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But
all right.
Yeah. Very fun. Seth wins yet again. That's all right. We will get him back next time. Probably not, but moving from Riddles in the Dark to Tidings of the Fellowship. Last week we read Nate's email, and he has not decided yet whether to give us money or not based off of the challenge that he had given us. He has actually, in fact, not spoken to us at all. So Nate, if you're listening, where's our $25, man?
25, wasn't it 50? But we definitely did.
We did not deserve 50.
Yeah, no, we don't deserve anything, honestly.
No, nothing. Yeah, nothing at all. But
all right.
Yeah. So if you go ahead, you good.
All right. So we'll just jump in here. Like Sam had mentioned, we're going to be talking about Legolas and Gimli today. Kind of go over their friendship, why it's kind of an obscure friendship during Tolkien's Middle Earth, and we're just gonna kind of go from there. So if you're following along, it's good to understand that we're starting off with the origins. Because why do dwarves and elves hate each other? If you don't understand that, then you're like, why is it a big deal that they're friends? However, the fact that Legolas and Gimli are so close is quite rare in Tolkien's Legendarium. So just a little backstory on the origins of the two, because it'll give us a good hint as to their personalities and stuff. The elves obviously were the firstborn. They were created by Eru himself during the music of the Ainur. Eru created elves and he created men. The firstborn, and wasn't it the followers or the second children, or I forget how he phrases it, but
I think it's just the second children.
Something like that. And then while he was singing, he actually finds out that Aule, one of his Ainur, created the dwarves without telling anybody. Aule was a bit ashamed of doing this. He wanted to create something that was of him, because if you remember Aule from the very beginning, he was a smith, he was a craftsman, he just wanted to create. He was actually kind of like Melkor, and like Melkor's opposite. Melkor just wanted to destroy things, and Aule was just creating things. And so he created the dwarves, and he created them to be strong and unyielding, which makes sense, as Peter Jackson did a great job of showing Gimli being just stubborn as stone, if you will. And like I said, he created them in secret, and this actually kind of upset Eru initially, and Eru confronted him and and basically said like, what are you doing? It's not okay for you to be doing this. I am the only one that can give life to these beings. These dwarves, they're tied to your every thought and every action because they're not sentient on their own. And at this point,
Mm,
Aule felt he was abashed, and he was actually going to kill the dwarves that he had created. And he lifted up his big hammer, and right as he was about to come down on him, the dwarves flinched and begged for mercy. And Eru stopped Aule and said, actually, they're cowering from you, so they are thinking for themselves. And he basically, out of love for Aule and understanding Aule's, he wasn't trying to overstep Eru, he just wanted to create something out of his own love. And so because of that, Eru
yeah.
basically said, no worries, I'll let him live. However, he basically says they need to go back to sleep until my children awaken. And there's
Yeah.
actually a really interesting quote. This is from Eru directly speaking to Aule, and he says, when the time comes, I will awaken them, and they shall be to thee as children, and often strife shall arise between thine and mine, the children of my adoption, which are the dwarves, and the children of my choice, which are the men and elves.
Yeah, and I love when I read this the first time, I was thinking like, man, why is Eru just like putting it there saying, oh, they're gonna have to like fight against each other, they're gonna strife against one another. But then as I was kind of reading that, it's like, no, that's like like that's a natural consequence of it because
Right.
that was never part of the design. You know, Ally went off on his own and did something that was different than like Eru's vision for the world. Touch my mic there. For the world. And so yeah, it just makes sense like that's just naturally going to happen that the elves and the dwarves would have strife from the very beginning. Obviously, it makes sense that they have strife from the beginning, as they were never meant to interact with one another. Obviously, elves are the firstborn, so they're a lot older and they're a lot more patient. And whereas dwarves are a lot more stubborn and steadfast, and they don't forget a grudge. And I think they even feel a little bit slighted anyway that they weren't chosen to be created by Eru from the beginning. So I think they also kind of feel that grudge. And so they always have this chip on their shoulder, and they pass that down from generation to generation. They kind of always have this like very staunch stubbornness that we see. I mean, obviously, you see it with Gimli. We've seen it with Meme, with Thorin, with just all the dwarves that we see throughout Tolkien's Legendarium. But as we discussed in Children of Hurin, going all the way back to the petty dwarves, that's of Meme and his kinsfolk, they were hunted by the elves before the elves actually realized that they were sentient beings, like Seth mentioned. Like they just thought they were game. And so, think about like going bear hunting or something. Like you just think, oh, I'm having fun here, not realizing that you were killing something that had thought and feeling and emotion. And so once they realized that, obviously that would put a little bit of strife in between the two, I would imagine, if you felt like your race was being hunted by the other race for a little while.
Oh yeah.
Then, as we talked about in Children of Hurin in our deep dive, just the interactions between Beleg and Meme. Meme was okay with the men. He didn't love them, but he was okay with them. But just the presence of Beleg, he was like, no, I cannot do it with this guy. Like Beleg didn't even really do anything mean. Like from my
No,
recollection, he
not at
was
all.
he was fine. It was just that deep rooted racist hatred, honestly, between the two that Meme could not get rid of. And as you go all the way back to the I guess has to be the first age when Meme's family helped create Nargothrond. And then when they tried to like kind of take that back from Finrod, they tried to kill him. This is a big reason why again there's strife between elves and these dwarves. So most recently, the most recent strife that we talked about was obviously the sacking of Doriath when King Thingol asked the dwarves to create this Nauglamir for the Silmaril to put on a necklace to show off to everybody. And then the dwarves were like, actually, that's ours. We're gonna take it back from you and kill you. They kill him. They sack Doriath, and then Baron, with some help, the elves actually go back and kill the dwarves and take back the Silmarillion. And so again, we just see back and forth. I mean, these are just some of the fights and the interactions between elves and dwarves. And even if you watch the extended, I don't know, have you ever seen the extended Hobbit movies?
I don't think so actually. I don't really watch the Hobbits that much.
So I bought the extended versions because I was like, what I just want to see more Tolkien. That's fine. More Peter Jackson stuff. He actually has a scene in the Battle of Five Armies extended where the dwarves and the elves start killing each other. Like they just start going at it and they
Hmm.
start wiping each other out before the armies of what was that? I guess not Mordor
Gundabad
at
or
the time,
whatever.
but Gundabad,
Yeah.
yeah, the old fortress or whatever show up. So yeah,
Hmm.
just all often there's just a lot of strife between these guys. So those are the first stage reasons why these dwarves and elves hate each other. But again, there's so many different reasons why they hate each other. But you also see some collaboration between the two. Celebrimbor helps create the Doors of Moria. And we see a lot of, especially the dwarves of Durin's house, were a lot more likely to have positive interactions with the elves. They realize the importance of having a friendship and an alliance as opposed to trying to fight these really powerful beings.
Yeah, there's times in the Second Age where the sorry, my camera froze for a minute there. And there's times in the Second Age when Durin's folk actually go and fight alongside, Celebrimbor and the elves of Eregion and everything during the wars with Sauron, the Wars of the Rings. And there's also, like Sam mentioned, it was Narvi and Celebrimbor that created the dwarves of Durin outside of Moria on the West Gate. So
the doors, the doors of Durin, not the dwarves of Durin.
oh, did I say dwarves?
That'd be a little
Yeah.
weird. That
Well,
would be a
thanks for
little
creating me
weird that
there.
if they were.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And so there are plenty of times where elves and dwarves interact in a positive way. Sometimes it's just, if you go all the way back to the First Age, Maeglin, the dark elf, and Errol, his father, they both were pretty close with the dwarves and learned a lot of craft and smithying from them. So there are times where they get along. However, most of the time it's more because there's beneficial stuff on both sides rather than because they really like each other.
Yep.
So this is just a kind of a fun little excerpt that kind of puts this into perspective for you. And it comes in the Fellowship of the Ring when the 9 walkers are right outside the gates of Moria and they're trying to get in. And Gandalf is talking to him about the dwarves or about the doors. I'll get it. And he actually says, those were happier days when there was still close friendship at times between folk of different race, even between dwarves and elves. And at that point, Gimli is, super stubborn and right off the bat. And he says, it was not the fault of the dwarves that friendship has waned. And Legolas responds, I've not heard that it was the fault of the elves. And Gandalf kind of just puts his foot down, puts it, and just says, I have heard both, and I will not give judgment now, but I beg you to, Legolas and Gimli, at least be friends and help me. I need you both. And so you can really see that even though they have very little reason to dislike each other for their own personal reasons, there's things that have happened in both their fathers' pasts and this premature hatred that's just kind of seething in their bloodlines, really, that they don't really get along and they're blaming each other rather than it's on the dwarves or it's on the elves. Let's figure out how to get along better. They can't do it.
Yeah, and it's a very obvious like physical appearance. You can tell an elf, you can tell a dwarf very, very easily. It's like when you go to a sporting event and you see, somebody wearing a Raiders jersey. You're like, God, guy sucks. I hate him. I don't even know him, but he's the worst. You just assume the worst of him because he's wearing a Raiders jersey.
Yep.
I'm sure there's good Raiders fans out there, but
somewhere
few and far between is what you would think. So again, that prejudice, the stereotypes, they definitely ring true. Specifically for sure for the dwarves and for the elves. But the next segment here, we wanted to discuss each person before they met each other. So Gimli and Legolas, there's not a whole lot of backstory on Legolas as much as of Gimli. I think Legolas, had Tolkien known he was going to do the Lord of the Rings at the time of the Hobbit, he would have probably added Legolas into there. Seth will talk a bit more about that. I think there's some really cool opportunities for him to come in. So I don't hate that Peter Jackson added him. I know some people are like, oh, he wasn't there, but he would have been. He would have been. Anyway, like I said, I'm rambling there. But Gimli, as you probably know, was the son of Gloin, the nephew of Oin, both former companions of Bilbo Baggins and the descendant of Durin the Deathless, which Durin, correct me if I'm wrong, Seth, is kind of the demigod of the dwarves, and he's supposed to be reincarnate every so often, and that, so there's really only one Durin at a time. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's why Rings of Power just completely botched it. They don't understand the lore, nor do they care enough to what was it, Durin the third and Durin the fourth? I don't remember what
third
they
and
picked.
Fourth. Yeah.
But it's just like, yes, Durin is reincarnate, and it's not one right after the other. You could go generations without Durin,
Yeah.
The dwarves really just believe that when there is a leader that is so powerful and that people want to follow so much, that he's the next Durin reincarnate, as opposed to,
Yeah.
just a family name being passed down.
Yeah. This is my dad, and now I'm Durin Jr. or something like it. Yeah. So he was not of the royal line, even though he was a descendant of Durin the Deathless. He was not of the royal line, so he himself couldn't become king or anything. He also was not given the title of Durin at any point in time. But through his father Gimli, they were also a close cousin once removed from Balin, the Lord of Moria, and his brother Dwalin, again more companions of Bilbo and the Hobbit. And it's also stated in the Unfinished Tales that Gimli was prevented from traveling with his father on the quest of Erebor because, I love this, Thorin and company thought him too young, though Gimli, being in his 60s, considered himself ripe for the adventure and was disappointed to be left behind. I love that. Again, like Tolkien was like, I need to add this in. Like, I'm
Yeah,
gonna put this in there because the stories tie together, and Gimli's personality. I mean, this matches perfectly. The fact that he would be like, "No, Dad, let me go," and he's like, "Nah, bro, you're too young." Which I don't remember the age of Fili and Keely. I don't know if they were older or younger than Gimli at the time. Now that
I
I think
assume
about
they
it, but
were. What's kind of crazy is, remember, they found Bilbo because they didn't want to have 13 because it was an unlucky number, and in reality they could have just been like,
when
all
they
right,
could have,
just send Gimli along, we'll get our 14, we'll be fine.
yeah. But even in all of Tolkien's intelligence, he had no idea that Gimli existed at that point, which is also cool. It's just, I mean, he might have. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, so Gimli did not get to go with the Hobbit, Bilbo, and the rest of the companions. But then you fast forward a little bit after the events of the Hobbit. This is actually really interesting. This was news to me. But a messenger came to Erebor, to the king under the mountain at the time, Dane the Second, a messenger of Mordor. He, servant of the Dark Lord, comes and offers friendship and requests for news of a Hobbit bearing a ring, because the news of Bilbo being a Hobbit, that he found this ring, would have reached far and wide, as that was a tale that, I mean, Bilbo was telling people, the dwarves were telling people. I'm sure along, many nights of roaring fires and malt beer, they were regaling the tales of the wolves and of the Goblin Town and all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure word would have gotten around. But Dane, being smart, he didn't really trust the messenger very much, so he sent Gloin and Gimli to Rivendell to seek the advice of Elrond. Again, that's where we see, okay, maybe we need to collaborate with these elves a little bit because they have more interactions, more understanding, more wisdom and knowledge on Sauron and that whole fight against them. So let's talk to them. And as a result, they were summoned to the Council of Elrond, where they first meet Legolas.
Yeah, and I have a quick question. I'm not trying to derail us too much. That messenger that went to Erebor, do you think it was the mouth of Sauron or one of the Nazgul or somebody completely different?
I don't know. There's definitely more in the written works of Tolkien, more servants of the Dark Lord, like men, or more fair. Like, I mean, what was the term that Frodo used in the movies? Like, a servant of the Dark Lord
Oh,
would
would seem
feel
fair and
fair and
feel fouler.
feel, yeah, something
Yeah.
like that. So I wouldn't imagine it'd be like a Nazgul or somebody, or even the Mouth of Sauron, that just, I mean, obviously the theatricals made him look a lot worse than he probably was. But I don't know. I kind of have a feeling it was maybe a man of like an Easterling or somebody, or even one of the elves that maybe he tortured and turned into,
Hmm.
a messenger. But for continuity's sake, it'd be cool if it was either Nazgul or Mouth Sauron.
Fair enough. I think it was probably one of the Nazgul personally, but I don't really have anything to back that up.
Sure.
Anyway,
I mean,
so
that would make sense. That'd make sense.
yeah, moving on to Legolas here. Like Sam mentioned, there's not as much about his life prior to Lord of the Rings. However, it's important to note that he is Thranduil's son, and Thranduil, I'm awful at pronouncing these names, Thranduil, potentially.
Thranduil, yeah.
He's the king of the Wooden Realm in Mirkwood, and that is the very same Wooden Realm that the company of Thorin had to pass through on their way to the Lonely Mountain. And if you remember from The Hobbit, they were incarcerated there and held prisoner, and Bilbo, with his magic ring, rescued them. So it kind of makes sense that Gimli would hold some prejudice against Legolas right off the bat. And even Sam mentioned this a little bit before. When Legolas came to the Council of Elrond, he actually came to give word that Gollum had escaped. And I like the way is it, I forget, is it Gandalf that asks it or Aragorn? I don't remember. He says, how did the folk of Thranduil fail in the trust? And Legolas basically says, not out of like, not that we're incapable of doing it, but rather that we're too kind and he slipped us.
Yep.
And so that was the reason that he was coming together, which again, not to derail us too much, but it's interesting how Tolkien writes this, where there's all these different things happening around Middle Earth. And at the same time, Boromir and Faramir, well, primarily Faramir, is having this dream and he wants it, explained. And so that's why Boromir shows up. And so they all show up at the same time. And so you got to think that Eru is somehow manipulating the time frames here so that everybody arrives in Rivendell at the same time.
Yeah, no, I love that. Absolutely. And like you mentioned at the Council of Elrond, Legolas, when he's telling about the escape of Gollum, he mentions just that. He said it was due to overkindness, is how Tolkien puts it, which makes Gloin chuckle as he's sitting there, and Gloin actually like gets up and looks at him and like, well, you were less tender to me. And so again, alluding to the fact that Legolas would have been there at that time, because he, like you mentioned earlier, he remembers his time incarcerated in Mirkwood, and then there's a little bit more back and forth, and then Gandalf's like, guys, sit down, it's fine. And so then like Gloin gets up, bows for him, and then sits back down, and they keep talking. But again, the Council of Elrond was probably one of my favorite chapters in the book. I think it's one of yours too, Seth. You mentioned there's
for sure
dialogue. There's so much happening, like you mentioned, from everyone's kind of giving their perspective, their point of view. But at the end of it, they determine that there has to be 9 companions because there's 9 Nazguls out there. And so in the movies, you see Legolas volunteering first, and then Gimli also volunteers because he didn't trust the elf's intentions. So he's, that I'll be dead before I see the ring in the hands of an elf. I don't think that's in the book. I skimmed through the chapter, but I'm pretty sure it's not.
I don't recall that being in the book, but it fits. It makes sense.
Yeah. Again, that's where like you take liberties. PJ did a good job of like, this would probably have been said, or at least like assumed. So then they set out as part of the Fellowship of the Ring, and there's quite a lot of bantering and bickering out between the two of them, especially when the company decides to go to Moria, which was actually Gandalf's idea. I don't know why PJ changed that. Maybe he's trying to make Gandalf wiser than he is by like having some knowledge that there may be a Balrog. But I mean, I just read that portion as I was preparing for this. Like Gandalf's like, there is this other way. As they're up on Caradhras getting, hit by the snow and stuff, he's like, we can go through Moria. And Gimli's like, oh yeah, let's go through Moria. Like, that sounds like a great idea. I'll go with you. And everyone else like says no, pretty much.
Yeah, even Aragorn gives him a warning. He basically says like, I don't fear for myself if we go in. I fear for you, Gandalf. Like, I fear for you specifically, which makes you wonder if Aragorn had some knowledge. Maybe he didn't know it was a Balrog because that surprised even Gandalf, but he knew that there was something that Gandalf would have to face.
Yep. But then, again, right before we have that interaction that Seth mentioned where Gandalf's telling Legolas and Gimli, just guys, be friends. Legolas is like, nah, I don't wish to go into Moria. Like, that's all he says. And then it says like everyone was silent there for a minute. But obviously they'd go into Moria and we see what happens. And you gotta feel for Gimli. He was like, oh, it's going to be great, guys. Like, let's go hang out with my family. We're going to have like a warm welcome. And it was not the case.
Yeah.
They lost their leader.
Yeah, not even a little bit. Not much of a warm welcome.
No.
So after the company passes through Moria and they lose Gandalf, they are actually admitted into Lothlorien, and this is where Celeborn and Galadriel dwell. And I think this is kind of the turning point for Legolas and Gimli's friendship in a way. And I think it's brought on in a way by Galadriel. I think Galadriel just softened Gimli's heart, and Legolas, there's not much to be said for him, really. He doesn't have much of a character arc in these, like he doesn't really soften that much. But you can tell that this part of the story is where Gimli's heart becomes a little bit softer. And so when they're admitted into Lothlorien, Gimli is actually treated with a lot of prejudice, and Haldir actually admits them and says, all right, well, we can take you all back to Caras Galadhron, however you say that, in the heart of Lothlorien, but I need to blindfold the dwarf because we don't let him, we don't want him to know the way. We don't trust him. And there's actually this part where Gimli is all frustrated, and Legolas says like, the plague on the stubbornness of dwarves. And then Aragorn's like, all right, well then we're gonna blindfold everybody so that the dwarf doesn't feel singled out. And Legolas is like, oh, but I want to look at the trees and this and that.
Which is such a, I mean, I know we're talking about Gimli and Legolas, but again, you look at the leadership of Aragorn, where he's like, no, if one of our companions can't be trusted, then you can't trust any of us. Like, that's how much he's trying to keep this family of fellowship, especially after they just lost their leader Gandalf to the mines of Moria. He's like, no, this team needs to trust each other. We need to be all on united front. I don't care, Legolas, if you want to look at trees and you want to look at flowers, like we're all being blindfolded right now.
Yeah, and to take that a step further, Aragorn's been here a couple of times. I mean, he already plighted his troth to Arwen in this very area.
That's true.
So he's like, yeah, you can blindfold me, even though it's me. Like, I'm Aragorn.
Yep.
And so Gimli's treated with this prejudice, and you can't help but think that just makes him even more angry at the situation. And then when they arrive to where Celeborn and Galadriel are, Celeborn learns that the dwarves were the ones that dove a little too greedily and too deep and awoke the Balrog, and he basically takes his welcome back, because he had welcomed all the 8 walkers at this point. And he's like, oh, if I knew that that's what the dwarves had stirred up, I would never have let Gimli in here. And Galadriel, and I quote her here, but she speaks directly, she's staring at Gimli and speaking to Celeborn basically, and she says, do not repent of your welcome to the dwarf. If our folk had been exiled long and far from Lothlorien, who of the Galathrim, even Celeborn the wise, would pass nigh and would not wish to look upon their ancient home, though it had become an abode of dragons? And then she goes on to describe Moria in Gimli's own tongue. So Gimli is hearing these names spoken perfectly, because Galadriel had passed through many times.
Yeah.
And so she's probably recalling all this from memory, but she's using Gimli's own language, which is rare because the dwarves really don't teach their language to anybody. So it must have just been the locations that she had picked up. But in hearing that, it really softens Gimli's heart, and he looks at her, and in his own mind, Tolkien is saying that this is what's happening in Gimli's mind. He's hearing the names given in his own ancient tongue. He looked up and met her eyes, and it seemed to him that he looked suddenly into the heart of an enemy and saw their love and understanding, which is just beautiful, because here Celeborn, her husband, is saying like, oh, we should never have let you back in, you dwarves are horrible. And then this Gimli's hearing this, and then he looks up and meets the eyes with Galadriel, and he sees their love and understanding.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous, and the grace that she has for him, and again, just washing away any preconceived notions or prejudices, and just like, hey, thanks for being here, welcome, you're welcome here. Can't help but think, how do you think Rings of Power Galadriel would be welcoming to Gimli?
I'm sure Gimli would have she uses a sword in Rings of Power, doesn't she? I'm sure he'd have a sword right through his chest or something, and then she'd be like, oops.
Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I should have saved breath for whatever it was. I don't even remember that. I haven't rewatched it. I know this
haven't either.
We're following rabbit trails, but I haven't. Yeah. Anyway,
real quick before we move on, just to in this scene a little bit later, as the Fellowship is leaving Lothlorien, like a month later, keep in mind that Galadriel gave Gimli her hair. She gave him 3 strands of hair, which she would not even give to Feanor back in Valinor in the First Age when he wanted to create the Silmarils. She would not give that to him. And so I think this has to be the turning point in Gimli for softening his heart.
Yeah, and Gimli even says like, I've seen now the fairest thing I've ever seen, and he's even has like interactions with Éomer later on in the Two Towers.
I love those interactions.
Yeah, Éomer's like, I've heard she's kind of like a deceptive snake or something like that, and he's like, hey, watch your tongue. I'll kill you right now. You don't know what you're talking about, because she is beautiful and she is amazing. And it makes sense, because the first interaction he has with her is not necessarily her physical beauty, but just the beauty of her words and the way that she's able to touch his heart on an emotional level.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Very, very cool. Love all of that interaction there between Galadriel and Gimli. Just a really cool addition that Tolkien put in the story. But then, obviously, as we know, they chose to be followers of Aragorn after the Hunters in the Breaking the Fellowship. So when Boromir dies and Frodo goes off on his own, Sam follows him. Merry and Pippin are taken. Gimli's like, "Is this what are we doing here?" And Aragorn's like, "Let's go hunt some orc." To quote the movie. And so they just start running, and they run and run and run. And what's so funny is that in the book, Aragorn actually tells Gimli, he's like, "Man, I wish we all had the stamina of dwarves. We'll all need it by the end of this." And so, that kind of tells me Gimli's outrunning Legolas in this instead of in, the comedic like falling down the hill. Ugh, just keep breathing. That's the key, which
Yeah.
is funny. I mean, again, I get why PJ did that, but you know,
Yeah.
then they run into the Rohirrim again. Gimli tells Aemir, "Hey, watch your mouth. That's Galadriel. Don't talk to her that way." And then Aemir kind of like says, "Okay, I welcome you guys. Here's some horses." So they share a horse and they go to Fangorn. And Gimli hates it, of course, and Legolas loves it, of course. And then fast forward to Helm's Deep, and Gimli was pushed back into the caves. I don't really remember. Again, I should go back and reread this, but I don't remember how he was pushed back into the caves. Um,
I believe
what
he
was
was
the
on the wall when it blew up, if I'm remembering correctly, and he got tossed down into the foray. And
Okay.
at one point, Aragorn's like, never. He's like, I saw him down there, and never have I seen an axe so wielded. Speaking of Gimli,
Yeah.
and I think then he retreated. He got the guys, and they retreated back into the caves.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So yeah, he goes into the glittering caves, as they're called, of Helm's Deep, and falls in love with them. And we'll talk a bit more about that in length here in a minute. But then after the Battle of Helm's Deep, you see this played out a lot more in film, but specifically, they talk about their little killing match. So Gimli wins. He cries, "42, Master Legolas," he cries. "Alas, my axe is notched. The 42nd had an iron collar on his neck. How is it with you?" And Legolas is like, "You've passed my score by one, but I do not grudge you the game. So glad am I to see you on your legs." So again, it wasn't oh, he's twitching, I'm going to shoot him between the legs. Like, it was just a fun little game. And there's a lot of back and forth on like, how do they only kill 40, 41, 42?
Out of
But also if
10,000.
you, yeah, out of 10,000. But if you watch the movie, PJ bumps up the number by one.
Hmm.
What's the purpose of that?
I
Because
have
he's like, "I'm sitting
no
on
idea.
43." Like, why change the number by one? Is that just like an error that he didn't realize? Like, or I don't get it.
It very well could have been. I have no idea.
Yeah.
That's a random catch, but it's interesting. I have no explanation for that.
Yeah. I went down a lot of like Reddit rabbit trails putting the stuff together.
Did
And
anybody
people were
have
like,
a
"What does it mean?
theory?
What does it mean?" No, not really.
Nobody had
I
an
think it
idea.
was just like, why did that change? Like, what was the point of that? And yeah, nobody had any ideas on that one.
Huh.
So yeah. Then of course at the celebration, in the halls of gosh, now I'm blanking, in Rohan, Edoras, where we break into the halls of every single time we do a podcast. I can't believe I forgot it.
You're good. It's been a while.
You
It's been
know,
a while.
it's been a minute, yeah, just rusty a little bit. But there, Peter Jackson adds in their little drinking game contest, which I'm curious, Seth. Obviously, we saw in the movie, Gimli passes out after however many drinks. Legolas wins. Who do you think in like Tolkien's lore? Because I think this was something that Tolkien, like, if he were to watch that, he'd be like, "Okay, that's kind of funny." Like, maybe he would, I don't know, maybe he'd be like, "No, that's not a thing an elf would do." But who do you think would actually win? Like, if Tolkien was the one writing that?
I honestly don't know. I'm trying to rack my brain. I don't know if I'm sure there is talk of elves drinking at some point, but
Well, you go back to The Hobbit, and when Bilbo
yeah, the
gets the
elves
keys
do
from the
get
warden, like,
drunk.
they're
Yeah.
drunk.
Yeah, that's a good
And so
point.
they can get drunk, but maybe the wine is just really, really high ABV as opposed to the ale of the Rohan people. I don't know, but
The Rohirrim. Yeah. I would be inclined to guess that it would be Gimli. That the dwarves are probably a little better at handling their beer, but I honestly don't know.
it means nothing whether whoever wins or whatever. But I think that'd be funny. It's interesting how he's got a little tingle in his fingers, after 5 or 6 drinks. But
Yeah.
have you seen those memes where it's like Legolas before the drinking game, and it shows just a picture of Legolas, but then it's Legolas after the drinking game, and it's him as in Pirates of the Caribbean as Will Turner, or no, like when he finds rum, I think is what it was. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
just like it was kind of funny. But yeah.
That's
Anyway, yeah,
clever. That's clever.
no drinking game in the book per se, but again, Peter Jackson had that little comic reliever, which was fun. So then we jump into on the road to Isengard when the whole company with Theoden is all going to Isengard to confront Saruman, to talk to Treebeard, and to find the hobbits again. They're having some conversations, and Gimli just describes his experience in the caves, and it's really beautiful. We're not going to read the whole thing. We're going to read a chunk,
Yeah.
but I just thought this back and forth between Legolas and Gimli is absolutely stunning. And again, from a character we don't get a whole lot of dialogue on, you see the passion in his voice and in his words for the caves and what he saw. So we're just going to read straight from the book here. And so I'm going to start. And this is Gimli talking to Legolas. Strange are the ways of men, Legolas. Here they have one of the marvels of the northern world, and what do they say of it? Caves, they say, caves! Holes to fly in times of war, to store fodder in. My good Legolas, do you know that caverns of Helm Deeps are vast and beautiful? There would be an endless pilgrimage of dwarves merely to gaze at them, if such things were known to be. Aye, indeed, they would pay pure gold for a brief glance.
And I would give gold to be excused, said Legolas, and double to be let out if I strayed in.
You have not seen, so I forgive your jest, said Gimli. But you speak like a fool. Do you think those halls are fair, where your king dwells under the hill of Mirkwood, and dwarves helped in their making long ago? They are but hovels compared with the caverns I have seen here, immeasurable halls filled with an everlasting music of water that tinkles into pools, far as Khaled Zaram in the starlight. And Legolas, when the torches are kindled and men walk on the sandy floors under the echoes of the doom, then Legolas, gems and crystals and veins of precious ore glint in the polished halls, and the light glows through folded marbles like shell, translucent as the living hands of Queen Galadriel. Which again, you see that callback to the beauty when he said, "I've never seen something more beautiful than Galadriel," and here he's saying, "I think I've seen something that maybe rivals the beauty of Galadriel a little bit." And he keeps going. He talks about it in good old Tolkien fashion, gives a lot of description.
A lot
so I'm
of
going to skip
detail.
down a little bit. Yeah, I'm going to skip down a little bit down to near the end of the paragraph here when he says, "There is chamber after chamber, Legolas, hall opening out of hall, dome after dome, stair beyond stair, and still the winding paths lead on into the mountain's heart. Caves, the caverns of Helm's Deep. Happy was the chance that drove me there, and it makes me weep to leave them."
Then I wish you this fortune for your comfort, Gimli, said the elf, that you may come safe from war and return to see them again. But do not tell all your kindred, there seems little left for them to do, from your account. Maybe the men of this land are wise to say little. One family of busy dwarves with hammer and chisel might mar more than they made.
"No, you don't understand," said Gimli. "No dwarf could be unmoved by such loveliness. None of Durin's race would mine those caves for stone or ore, not if diamonds and golds could be there. Do you cut down groves of blossoming trees in the springtime for firewood? We would tend these glades of flowering stone, not quarry them. With a cautious skill, tap by tap, a small chip of a rock, and no more, perhaps, in a whole anxious day. So we could work as the years went by. We should open a new ways and display far chambers that are still dark, glimpsed only as a void beyond fissures of the rock. And lights, Legolas! We should make lights, such lamps as once shone in Khazad-dûm, and we wished we would be drive away the night that was lain there since the hills were made. And when you desired rest, we would let the night return."
You move me, Gimli, said Legolas. I have never heard you speak like this before. Almost you make me regret that I have not seen these caves. Come, let us make this bargain. If we both return safe out of the perils that await us, we will journey together for a while. You shall visit Fanghorn with me, and then I will come with you to see Helm's Deep.
"That would not be the way of return that I should choose," said Gimli, "but I will endure Fangorn, if I have your promise to come back to the caves and share their wonder with me."
You have my promise, said Legolas, but alas, now we must leave both cave and wood behind for a while.
Man, I love it. I
That's
love that
beautiful.
back and forth. There's so much that happened. Yeah. It's Gimli's just speaking with such passion. You're like, Legolas, like you should have seen it. And to be able to move an elf, like a dwarf, to be able to move an elf with words,
Yeah.
that doesn't happen.
No,
That
it
doesn't
doesn't.
happen.
And just the descriptions that Tolkien uses, and we did skip a huge part of that behemoth
We did,
paragraph
yeah.
on the previous page, but just the descriptions that he uses, you can see why Legolas is moved, because you're sitting there, you're imagining it in your head, and you kind of get a little grin on your face, like, wow, this, could you imagine seeing that? And that's the exact same thing that Legolas is thinking. And it really shows just the difference in their personalities, but how they've started to come together as friends to be able to have this conversation, even with, because Legolas kind of speaks a Fanghorn in a similar fashion, not quite as passionately. But even Gimli's like, no, I don't want Fanghorn. And so it's cool that they're able to make this bargain at the end of that.
And even the way that Legolas kind of like takes a jab at the dwarf race again by saying, well, you shouldn't tell your friends because they're going to mess it up. And he's like, no, man, you don't understand. Like, this is far beyond anything that we would mess with. And then he even like relates to Legolas on his level by saying, like, would you cut down a blossoming tree? No, you wouldn't. You would tender it and care for it. And that's what we're going to do with these stones. Like, it was just really cool the way that he has such an emotional IQ here with Legolas, and he's sharing this all the while. Their relationship is just blooming. It's really, really cool. Again, a very unlikely friendship that should by no means have gotten this far.
Yeah, and you notice, I mean, the turning point in Lothlorien with Galadriel, and then the hunt with Aragorn, the three hunters chasing down the hobbits. After that point, these two are inseparable. They do everything together. Yep. Aragorn goes this way, Gandalf goes this way, Merry and Pippin split. Like, everybody goes in their own directions except Legolas and Gimli. They are always together, kind of from that point forward. So you can really see this friendship starting to blossom. So when we skip forward ahead to the Return of the King and the Paths of the Dead, there's another fun little interaction here between the two of them. When Aragorn told everybody that they needed to go through the doors and into the Paths of the Dead, and everybody was terrified. The Dunedain, Aragorn's kindred, were actually with them, and they went right in with Aragorn, and Legolas basically was like, how does he phrase it in the book? Something like the dead of men don't scare me, or something like that. Like, I'm not scared of dead men.
I think that was one of Arwen's brothers,
Elladan and Elrohir.
Elladan and Elrohir. I think it was one of them, because
might have been,
when I just read this, Legolas like covers the horse because Aragorn's like, we need the horses to go through this,
right?
And the elves are like, no, they're not going to go through. But then Legolas like covers the eyes of the horse and sings to him something, and then they go through.
Interesting.
Really
yeah.
Say anything. But.
Yeah. So I mean, Legolas is fine, which is crazy that after hearing what Legolas just said about the glittering caves, I'd pay twice to be let out if I strayed in. And here he is following Aragorn, not even second guessing it. And at this point, Gimli, of all people, Tolkien says, his knees shook and he was wroth with himself. Here is a thing unheard of. An elf will go underground, but a dwarf dare not. And with that, he plunged in. And so it really took a lot for him to go in. But again, the love of Aragorn and the friendship with Legolas, he was able to face the dead king.
And a little old-fashioned dwarven pride, maybe a little bit too.
I think that definitely had something to do with it. And so again, Legolas and Gimli, they're inseparable. They follow Aragorn through, and they, help with the ships of the Corsairs, and they end up at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields together, and they fight together and have another little battle on Counting, which I believe is not in the book. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's definitely in the movie, and they just have fun with it. That
only counts as one.
That classic line. The look that Legolas gives, just at the generic Orlando Bloom, like staring off into nothing, like, oh, is that impressive? I just did that. And Gimli's like, and it still only counts as one.
It's great.
And then again, they walk around Minas Tirith together after the battle, and then they go fight at the Siege of the Black Gate together. And Sam put this in here, and I think it's a beautiful addition. And it's one of those things where Peter Jackson understood the themes and the heart of Tolkien as he made these movies. And so I don't like everything. I've been very critical about a lot of the changes he's made, but he's still stuck with the overall themes. And
Yeah.
he had that that scene where Gimli is standing next to Legolas, and the minions of Mordor are coming out of the Black Gate, and Gimli looks up at him and he said, "I never thought I'd die fighting side by side with an elf." And Legolas kind of just looks at him and smiles, and he says, "Well, how about dying side by side with a friend?" And Gimli just looks at him, he goes, I could do that.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's the perfect culmination of their friendship. And I love that Peter Jackson put that in there.
Yeah, it definitely is one of those liberties that you're like, it makes perfect sense. It follows along with the heart of Tolkien, and there's so many interactions that Peter Jackson couldn't get to. And so to be able to like kind of throw that in there as like the last little final thing just solidifies even just their relationship beyond after the destroying of the ring. Because again, Peter Jackson wasn't going to put that on screen of them going through the caves and Fangorn and all this stuff. So he couldn't really express that. But you can see that's a lifelong friendship that's never going to die, with that scene. It's really kind of heartfelt. And then you got Merry and Pippin running, and then they get trampled by everybody else.
Which Merry
wasn't even supposed to be there.
There you go.
That is one. Yeah, that is one. Again, we're praising Peter Jackson, and then we'll kick him in the shin here for this one, because that was Pippin's chance of like getting to be courageous on his own. And we even see from his perspective, as the orcs are coming out, and he's like, "Gosh, what did I get myself into? It's okay. Like, I'm gonna fight. I'm gonna do this."
And then Gimli's even like, "Man, I'm glad I know what the foot of a hobbit looks like. I was surprised to find you alive, but I dug you out from under the dead troll."
Yeah, exactly. That's good stuff. Good stuff. Well, after obviously we know the eagles came and rescued them, the ring is destroyed, and we have Aragorn's coronation at Minas Tirith, and everyone, feasting and celebrating, and then they go on their own ways. We have what's called the chapter Many Partings, and this is just a straight up excerpt from Tolkien's book here, Return of the King. Many Partings, says this: "Now the guests were ready, and they drank the stirrup cup, and with great praise and friendship they departed, and came at length to Helm's Deep, and there they rested 2 days. Then Legolas repaid his promise to Gimli, and went with him to the glittering caves. And when they returned, he was silent, and would say only that Gimli alone could find fit words to speak of them. And never before has a dwarf claimed a victory over an elf in contests of words," said Gimli. "Now, therefore, let us go to Fangorn and set the score straight."
Oh man, that's just beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Again, you go back to that excerpt that we read, and if that's how Gimli's talking about those caves, Legolas, I mean, he's an elf and they're more elegant with their speech, but you're not going to top Gimli's words on that.
No, absolutely not. But I mean, it's cool that even Legolas saw the beauty and was like, he was spot on. Like, those words are correct. I agree with him. Even though I don't like caves, I don't like going underground. I like being, be able to see the stars and all that kind of stuff. He's like, no, that was gorgeous. And then they get to go to Fangorn, which is really, really neat.
Yep, I love that. And that's kind of where the book ends. However, there is a little bit of a snippet in the appendices about Gimli, and it's found under I think it's Durin's Folk heading in the appendices, but the last paragraph and a half is about Gimli and what happened after. And it's said that he went back to the caves, and this must be after him and Legolas and everybody came and visited, but he came back and he became the Lord of the Glittering Caves. He got a bunch of Durin's Folk, cool. and those things that he had imagined in the Two Towers after seeing it for the first time, he was actually able to bring to life. He became the Lord of the Glittering Caves, and he tended those halls and created beauty after beauty. And he actually helped the men of Rohan and Gondor a lot. The gates that were knocked down by Gron during the siege of Minas Tirith, he actually replaced those gates with mithril and steel, which, if you think about value of that gate, to have mithril and steel, I mean, what a gift. And so along with that, Legolas went to Ithilien, and if you remember at some point, and I believe it's when he's talking to Imrahil or something like that, where they talk about Ithilien, and Legolas longs for that area. but he actually takes a bunch of his kindred from the woody realm, the woodland realm, woody realm.
Woodland.
Definitely woodland. He
Careful.
brings up yeah, we're going right back to the beginning of this, aren't we?
Full circle.
Bring it full circle. And he becomes kind of a little lord in his own right of the land of Ithilien, and he tended it. And Tolkien even says that Ithilien once again became the fairest country in the Westlands. So I don't remember when he said that in the first place, other than it was supposedly just a beautiful forest. Maybe that was Faramir said that at some point in time. I don't remember. But yeah, he helped tend the forest and made it beautiful, which after that, unfortunately, King Elisar, Aragorn, dies. I believe he ruled for 120 years after I believe it was 120 years, if I'm getting that right. After he was coronated. And so he had a good run there. And so Legolas and Gimli, they live longer than men do, even the men of the race of the Númenóreans. And so at this point, Legolas decides he's going to sail back across the sea and follow his kindred over there. And Gimli actually goes with him, or at least it's thought to. Tolkien says that they think that he did, but he doesn't explicitly say. And so with Legolas went Gimli, Gloin's son, and he was permitted into the Undying Lands. Now, it's important to, just like Frodo, to realize that getting there doesn't make him immortal. He still will die.
Right.
But he gets to look upon Galadriel again. He gets to see something that no dwarf has ever seen before. And it kind of just begs the question, why was he let in? Tolkien even mentions that Galadriel may have obtained the grace for him to arrive, which I think may have something to do with it. It could have been the fact that he, was such an important piece of defeating Sauron. Could be the friendship with Legolas. I don't really know. What do you think?
Tolkien, I think he does that with some of his favorite characters. He's like, nah, this guy we'll just make it okay, make it happen for him. Because you see that with Frodo, you see that. Yeah. I'm in charge. I'm Eru Ilúvatar, and I will decide who gets to go to the Undying Lands. Because even Sam, doesn't he get to go to the Undying Lands too?
I think he does.
I guess he was a ring bearer,
right?
So maybe that would give him the right to do so. But even still, I don't know. It seems like it's just kind of like one of those things. I'll save these for my favorite characters. But again, it does talk to specifically, again, the relationship of Legolas and Gimli, and that he desired to go with him instead of dying with his folk, instead of being immortalized down in Middle Earth and even the Glittering Caves. Buried in stone like the lords of old, he chooses, I'm gonna stay with my bestie. We're gonna go check out this Undying Land thing that he's got for me. So
again, they were just completely inseparable.
Yep, absolutely.
So here's another question.
So that's kind of,
do you
go ahead.
Sorry, just another thought. Do you think he saw Frodo there, or because this is 120 years after, and so the Hobbit, how old was Bilbo? He was just over the old Tuke's age when he went to the Undying Land, so he couldn't have been like 130, I think it was, or something along those lines. Not that old. And this is 120 years plus. Wasn't he like 50 or so at the time? 55, something like that at the time. So do you think Frodo was able to live longer by being in the Undying Lands, and maybe he got to see Gimli again, or was Frodo long gone and Gimli had no chance?
Well, again, you got to clarify, maybe even for some of our listeners, that the Undying Lands, that doesn't mean that you go, it's not like heaven. You don't go there and you just live forever in perfect harmony and peace and all that kind of stuff. It's the place where the elves had kind of, or rather like the Valar, like set apart for themselves, right? And so, and for the firstborn elves. And so, they aren't granted immortal life once you get there. We talked about that with our Númenor podcasts. Men sought for immortality by going to the Undying Lands, but even if they would have gotten there, they would not have received it. Right. However, you bring up a good point. Are their lives prolonged longer? I mean, you look at this may be a bad correlation, but early Old Testament in the Bible, the Bible says that Moses lived for hundreds of years, and Adam lived for 900 years, something like that, 800, 900 years, and Is that just because there's a lot better nutrition there? Because nothing's processed? Because there's no evil? Not as much. I don't know. Like, what's
Yeah.
so? Yeah, I would like to think that he got to reunite with them a little bit, but it's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was
Well,
a long
here's
drawn out answer to say I don't know.
that's okay. It actually triggered another thought of mine while you were talking.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I'm just gonna keep rambling here, I guess, but
Yeah.
it makes me surprised. So Gimli going to the Undying Lands. Now there obviously are elves, right?
Hmm.
With Earendil, there's now men,
Yeah.
right? So who are we
Yep.
missing? We're missing hobbits. Hobbits are there now because of Frodo and
Hmm.
Bilbo, but there wasn't a dwarf until Gimli. And so he's the first
Mm.
dwarf to ever go. And if you remember, there was always going to be strife. Why? Because the children of my choosing and the children of my adoption. Is there
Mm.
more to that where Eru is in a way
Wow.
adopting the dwarves now because he's allowing Gimli into the Undying Lands?
You just blew my mind. Again, you take that correlation, that connection of the Bible too, like, Israel being God's firstborn and the Jewish people being God's children, and then through Jesus, everyone has given that option to be adopted into his family, Gentiles
Yeah,
and Jews alike. It doesn't matter what race you are, every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess. People of every nation will praise the Lord, is what Revelation says. And holy cow, maybe that's what Tolkien had in mind.
I don't know. I don't know.
Wow, you gave
But
me a lot to
I,
ponder there. He is so cool. There's so much there. I mean, this guy was absolutely incredible.
I imagine
Wow.
just going to heaven and being like, all right, I got questions for Jesus, obviously, but Tolkien and I are going to have a chat.
Yeah, yeah. Get your priorities straight. We'll go to Jesus first, hang out with him for a while. But yes, definitely want to talk to John Ronald Rule and be like, hey man, like
We got some
what
questions.
what did it mean? Yeah. Golly. But again, going back to the brilliance of Tolkien, where he wanted it to be applicable to each and every person who read it in the way that they needed to hear it. And
Yeah.
that's what I needed to hear. I needed to hear that adoption piece. I'm even going to be speaking on that this next Wednesday on how we're adopted into the family of God. And I mean, I'm not going to use this because my students won't
You think it's
get
a
the
little obscure
correlation.
for Gen Z?
Probably, but for me, I mean, this is just reinforcing that idea
Yeah.
that we're all children of God. It just as, like you mentioned, Eru adopts the dwarves and
Yep.
becomes they're all children of Eru now, which is wow, getting chills. It's
That's
cool.
pretty cool. It's one of those things
Very,
where
very cool.
I genuinely believe if you ask Tolkien that, he would be like, I don't know. Because like it made sense, right? He followed Legolas. They were good friends. Like that's probably the extent of it
Yeah.
is, but he writes it
Right.
in
Yeah.
such a way
Yeah.
with such creativity, but also ambiguity in a way that it's like, yeah, you can come up with your own conclusion. Do what you want with that
Definitely.
information.
Definitely. So cool. I mean, it's just I've read a lot of fantasy, and I'm reading a different fantasy book right now, and Ariel and I are reading a book together, and I don't see anywhere near the amount of depth that
No,
in anything nowadays that you can find in Tolkien. I mean, Harry Potter is amazing. The books, anyway, I love them. There's a lot you can do with that, but just the lessons to be learned and the tangents to go down and the speculation to be made it's unparalleled.
well, and again, it's because he was creating a history. He wasn't creating a book.
Yeah,
These days, people
yeah,
write books because they want to get published and get their book out there. And he literally
yeah.
wrote the Silmarillion and didn't expect anybody to want to read it. Really, he was surprised when the Silmarillion didn't even get published while he was alive. I mean,
Right,
he
right.
just wanted to create a history, and I think that's why there's so many different rabbit holes and angles you can take because it's not just a cut and paste start and finish story. It's a history that
Hmm.
he just didn't finish all the history.
Yeah, man. That sounds like a really good place to to end our conversation, our discussion. A really lovely, wonderful conversation on the story of Gimli and Legolas and their relationship. And just one final thought. I mean, there's some people out there that have tried to desecrate the name of Tolkien and claim he's a racist for not having, specific races involved in his works, or that he would have only wanted white people to be in an adaptation, all that kind of stuff. Like, Tolkien was not a racist. You
No.
see that in this relationship. he purposely celebrated the diversity, to use a modern term. He celebrated the diversity of these two characters where they complemented one another. They didn't form to where everyone had to be the same. They were their same individual people with their individual desires and wants and skill sets. And yet they came together and became best friends. And
Yep.
it goes against all odds, but Tolkien is telling us that no race should matter, no age difference should matter, gender, any of that kind of stuff. Like, you can just be friends with people by being respectful, by listening to them, to understand where they're coming from, cultural backgrounds, stuff like that. He's not a racist. It's just
No.
crazy that people would put that into his mind, or put that on his name. It pains me that that's even a thought for some people. Which thankfully it's a small thought. I don't feel like the vast majority of people have actually taken any kind of heed to those accusations, but still, it has to be said. Gimli and Legolas are proof that he's not a racist.
I completely agree. I'll leave it at that. You said that very well.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, guys. If we've been seeing some spikes of new downloads from different podcast episodes, even all the way back to Concerning Brothers, when we both had horrible microphones and there was just, we didn't know what we were doing.
There's a first time for
hopefully
everything.
we've gotten hopefully we've gotten a little bit better since then. So we welcome you guys to our fellowship. We thank you so much for coming along this road with us. We'd love to hear from you guys, so please send in your Tolkien stories, your thoughts on any of our podcasts, or any just thoughts that you have on Tolkien too. So with that, we're going to call for aid. Gondor calls for aid by shouting, breaking into the halls of Nediseld and shouting, Gondor calls for aid. Will you, Rohan, answer? If you enjoyed the podcast, please light a beacon of your own by sharing it with fellow friends and fans. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review, not only on the podcast, but now on the YouTube channel as well. Please share us your Tolkien story, your thoughts on anything Tolkien. You can email us at wekpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We can't wait to join next time for some more well-earned comforts, whatever those may be. But until then, we bid you a very fond farewell.